These are the Elean marbles, the coveted relic of a glorious Greek heritage. The rows between the British Museum and the Greek government regarding its ownership have made plenty of headlines. The Parthenon in Athens sits bereft of these magnificent sculptures, but the master under whose direction they were created sculpted other masterpieces as well. Unfortunately, they suffered a worse fate. The Greek city-states were fond of warfare. There's no denying that. They basked in the glory of their victories and rued the days of their losses. Around 471 BCE, two states in the Peloponnese region, Elis and Pisa, settled a long-standing conflict. Elis emerged victorious and took control of the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia, a small town. Like Zeus's sanctuary at Athens, which the Athenians say was built by Deucalion, and they cite as evidence that Deucalion lived at Athens, a grave which is not far from the present temple. This one had a long past as well. The Olympian site was, in fact, so old and sacred that it was among the most important places of worship in the Greek world. Nestled within a sacred grove, its history goes back to the 9th and 10th centuries BCE, according to some records. Pindar, the 5th century BCE Theban poet, claimed that Heracles, the heroic son of Zeus, had founded the sacred precinct next to the Temple of Hera and the alleged tomb of Pelops. The tomb of Pelops does not exist anymore, and information on it is sparse, but the Temple of Hera was built around 590 BCE. Originally home to both Hera and Zeus, it carries the torch of the Olympic Games to this day, the same games that trace their history back to the 8th century BCE. People traveled to Olympia from all over the region not only to pay respects to the gods and witness the spectacle of the games. It was a pan-Hellenic center where all Greeks were welcome regardless of politics and conflicts. And since there were plenty of visitors, there were hippodromes, baths, other accommodations, and, of course, a stadium for the games. After the Eleans took control of the site, they decided to celebrate their victory over rival Pisa with a construction project. They decided to build a new temple of Zeus. Libon of Elis, a local architect, took over the job around 472 BCE and completed it around 456 BCE. The temple was a peripteros. Here's an image to explain what it means. These colonnades on all sides can also be seen in other Greek constructions of the time. For instance, take a look at the second temple of Hera at Paestum. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia was considered a marvel of Doric Greek construction, one of the 3 canonical orders of Greek art that was known for its strength and simplicity. The ungainly, local limestone was covered with stucco, and its external walls were adorned with magnificent friezes that expressed popular myths. But what about the interiors? And there are pillars inside the temple, and porticos above, and an approach by them to the image of Zeus, the 41-feet statue of the god of thunder, whose image is in gold and ivory, seated on a throne, and a crown is on his head imitating the foliage of the olive tree. In his right hand, he holds a victory in ivory and gold, with a tiara and crown on his head, and in his left hand, a scepter adorned with all manner of precious stones, and the bird seated on the scepter is an eagle. The robes and sandals of the god are also of gold, and on his robes are imitations of flowers, especially of lilies. The Greek historian Strabo, who lived in the 1st century BCE, wrote that if Zeus arose and stood erect, he would unroof the temple. So, who was responsible for such a magnanimous image? Why, Phidias, of course. The divine sculptor had overseen the construction of the Athenian Acropolis and had given form to Athena within. Here's a reconstruction in Tennessee. The less said about that, the better. But the real one was much different. Plutarch writes in his parallel lives about how Athena appeared to Pericles, the Athenian statesman, in a dream. So, in commemoration, Phidias produced the great golden image of the goddess. The sculpture brought him great fame, and he was invited to the Temple of Zeus in Olympia to carve the thunder god. The statue, which he completed in 435 BCE, was a chryselephantine sculpture, which is a long-winded way of saying that it was made of ivory and gold. Phidias was the first sculptor to successfully build a statue with ivory and gold. He and his companions started with a wooden substructure to give shape to the skeleton. Then, the ivory slabs formed the god's skin and gold leaves his clothes. We've gone through Pausanias's description of its appearance for the onlooker, but he was even more impressed by the throne adorned with gold and with jewels, to say nothing of ebony and ivory. Upon it are painted figures and wrought images. There are 4 victories represented as dancing women, 1 at each foot of the throne and 2 others at the base of each foot. On each of the 2 front feet are set Theban children ravished by sphinxes, while under the sphinxes Apollo and Artemis are shooting down the children of Niobe. Others, like Strabo, however, were less than impressed. While his image of Zeus toppling the temple's roof makes one tremble, the preface to those words tells a different tale. Although the temple was very large, the artist is thought to have missed the proper symmetry, for he showed Zeus seated but almost touching the roof with his head. But even he concludes that Phidias had achieved no less than an exceptional feat. Strabo also narrates that when Phidias was first asked about his inspiration, he quoted Homer, "The son of Kronos spoke, and bowed his dark brow in assent, and the ambrosial locks waved from the king's immortal head, and he made great Olympus quake." And boy oh boy, did it make Olympus quake. The Roman historian Livy recalls how the Roman general Aemilius Paulus was moved to his soul as if he had seen the god in person. And in ancient Greek culture, that was the norm. The representation of a god was not a mere representation. It was a medium between the earth and the heavens. One has to contextualize the experience of approaching ancient religious sites in those times. In the 20th century, art historian John Berger would relate how, in a time before cameras and prints, any image, but religious relics in particular, would be seen after taking on arduous pilgrimages and traversing many miles on foot, and in that, it was no less than mythical. In the 1st century, Dio reminisced about his experience, claiming whoever stood in front of Zeus would forget all the terrors and hardships that fall to our human lot. What more can be said about the mythical status of the statue than the tale Strabo tells of its completion? He states that once the construction was done, Phidias called upon the heavens to approve of his work, when, immediately, runs the legend, a thunderbolt fell on that part of the floor where, down to the present day, the bronze jar stood to cover the place. But the statue had its quirks as well. For instance, one of the figures at Zeus's feet was Pantarses, Phidias's alleged lover. He had also written on the god's finger, Pantarses Kalos, or Pentarses is beautiful. No surprise then that the debauched Roman emperor Caligula wanted to ship it and other sculptures like it to Rome. However, the gods did not will it so, for as Dio says, the ship built to bring it was shattered by thunderbolts, and loud laughter was heard every time that anybody approached as if to take hold of the pedestal. A few centuries after Caligula attempted to ship it, the Christian Roman emperor Theodosius banned pagan cults and pagan imagery. Folk stories tell that it was then carried off to Constantinople to save it from Christian persecution, but was lost to a fire at the Palace of Lausus in 475. As for the temple, archaeologists believe it fell to earthquakes in the 6th century. The site of the temple was consequently discovered by British antiquarian Richard Chandler in the 18th century, but Phidias's statue of Zeus remains lost to history. To some extent, it suits its mythological traits, and, just like that, another ancient wonder bites the dust. You might also like to find out more about the other 6 wonders of the ancient world. Check out this playlist and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff to show your appreciation. That's it for today. We'll see you in the next one.